Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is the editor-in-chief of MacStories.net, Federico Viticci. Hi, .net Federico. How are you today?
Hello. Hi. Good morning and happy Friday, John. How's it going?
Yes, it's going really well. I got up early today, both to record.
Very early.
Very early because of our schedules were a little bit strange today. But I got up really early today to record, one. But also, when I got up, I happened to be checking Twitter, as you do, having your first cup of coffee in the morning. And I realized the lunar eclipse was happening. And in a rare coincidence, and it's a very rare coincidence, it's actually clear here today. So I went out, stood on the driveway in the cold, and watched the lunar eclipse for a couple of minutes.
So you woke up to do a podcast very early in the morning, and then you just walked out in your
your
driveway,
yes,
in your sweats, to look at the moon.
I did. I stood out
Nice.
on the cold, hard concrete, stared up at the sky, and wondered if anybody was watching me watch the moon.
Yeah, that's the kind of scene that I'm picturing. Like, was
Yes.
anybody watching you doing that?
Yeah.
That must have been incredible.
I tried to take a picture, but it was too hard. The moon was very bright and only partially blocked by, I guess, the Earth's shadow. And I guess it's the longest lunar eclipse in 500 years. So big deal, I guess. And I
Did
went out
you
and
make
saw
a
it.
wish or something?
No, I didn't. I just
No.
kind of said, oh, hi, lunar eclipse. Went back inside where it was warm because it's pretty cold here today.
Very underwhelming then.
Yeah, it was. Well, I feel like that's like part of like a nerd requirement. If it's related to space, you need to kind of like go acknowledge it. So I went, I acknowledged the lunar eclipse, and I came back in and got ready for my day. So here we are recording MacStories Unwind, and we have some stories to talk about today, as well as some interesting picks and other things going on. Where should we start, Federico?
We should start from the story that you've done about the Stream Deck on MacStories, because I know that there's more coming on MacStories Weekly. So
Yes.
what have you been doing with the Stream Deck?
So I have been setting it up with a variety of different automations. I mean, the thing that really got me back into the Stream Deck, and I've had the Stream Deck XL, which is the big one that has 32 buttons. I've had it for a couple of years. I actually ordered it right before the pandemic, and then I really put it aside because I'm not a huge fan of the hardware or the software, honestly. But if you get the right icon sets and do a nice job with the buttons and the way they look, it's still a very powerful device and has a lot going for it in terms of automation. And with shortcuts added to Monterey, it was one of those things where now all of a sudden the Stream Deck opened up a whole bunch of additional possibilities that weren't available before. So I'm doing things like including shortcuts for uploading images or taking screenshots and a bunch of other day-to-day type of actions, and programming them to buttons so they're just a one press action. But I'm also doing things like I've created there are 3 ways to organize the buttons, which is where some of the complexity comes in. You can have pages of buttons, folders of buttons, and profiles. And profiles are kind of interesting because they're app based, so you automatically switch to them when you open a particular app. And I did that for Obsidian only so far because Obsidian has so many hotkeys that it's really impossible, I think, to remember them all if you want to use a lot. So I've been slowly taking all the features in the hotkeys section of the system preferences for Obsidian and creating hotkeys for my favorites and then mapping them to the Stream Deck so that when I'm writing, right next to me, I have a little panel with buttons that can do some of the most common actions very easily and quickly. So there's that. There's the shortcuts. Then there's just normal things, I guess simpler things like launching apps and opening websites, just things that I do over and over every day. Like I have buttons for MacStories in the club because, I open those sites dozens of times a day, as well as the administrative panels for those. And it's just a really great way to do that. And what really I think sets the Stream Deck apart more than anything else is the fact that it allows you to mix and match these different kinds of automations. It's not really just for shortcuts or just for, third-party apps. Once you incorporate all these different types of automation and you add your own, icons to the buttons, they they really blend together, and it becomes your own personalized set of automations where it doesn't really matter what the underlying technology is that's triggering them. What matters is what they do and whether it fits with the way you work. And that's really what I like, because it abstracts it even further. And once you get a nice setup, it can be really handy to have.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, I will be thinking about this. I don't know if I have a use for it yet, but I'm thinking about it. I think
and there's, you can get smaller ones too. I have the big one, which there's something to be said for not having to flip around to different pages a lot, but because you have pages, folders, and profiles available to you, you really don't need 32 buttons. There's a 15 button model, which is a lot smaller and takes up a lot less desk space, which is good too.
Yeah. All right. Also on MacStories this week, I wrote about Tweetbot 6.6. And generally speaking, I explained how and why I've been using Tweetbot, again, as my main client. It's all part of sort of this thing that I've been doing with Twitter, where I have changed how I consume Twitter on a daily basis, instead of having to play catch up on my timeline multiple times throughout the day, as I used to do with the official Twitter app. With Tweetbot, because of timeline sync, I can let the tweets go by and I can check just a couple of times per day, and I can catch up on my whole timeline, because I cannot kick the habit of being a timeline completionist. And in general, Tweetbot version 6, which came out at the beginning of the year, initially was kind of underwhelming, but because of the switch to a subscription model, the developers of Tapbots have been able to constantly iterate on the app and adding new features over the course of multiple updates. And in this version, Tweetbot received the ability to create polls on Twitter, as well as to limit who can reply to your tweets. And especially this one is a conversation-related feature that Twitter launched in 2020. And I think it's had such an impact on people who, post sometimes controversial things, and they don't want to be, inundated with replies from people they don't even know. And I think it's excellent that this feature is now available as via the API. The new API, which Twitter officially rolled out this week for all developers. So Tweetbot version 6, I don't think it's the last time we're going to see this app on MacStories, but I've really been enjoying it myself. And of course, on top of the new API, there's the whole sort of a modern app for Apple platforms kind of aspect, where on iPhone and iPad, Tapbots is really taking advantage of all the latest features of iOS and iPadOS, from widgets to multi-column, multi-window, native keyboard shortcuts on iPad, Excel widgets on iPad as well, the new notification stuff, like all of this quick note support, even like all of these features, they are supported in Tweetbot. And so I really hope that with the subscription model, the Mac version of Tweetbot will be next, because Tweetbot on the Mac is still stuck on the older version, which is still great. And I really like how it's got sort of those TweetDeck-like columns on the Mac. But I really would like to see the same sort of foundation of Tweetbot 6 also in the Mac version.
All right. Well, let me take a brief aside and ask you what you think so far of Twitter Blue, because I signed up last night, and this came out just, around the same time as the Tweetbot update, and I've been playing around with both. And I know a lot of people are excited by Twitter Blue, but I'm kind of not feeling it, actually. I haven't used it a lot yet, but you get ad-free articles for certain publications, which I guess is nice, except that I use reader mode so much that I don't really, and ad blockers, that I don't really feel like that's a big issue for me. And you get the ability to reorganize the tab bar at the bottom and a few other things in it. But I don't know. I'm not sure it's something that's going to stick with me beyond a little bit of experimentation.
Yeah, I tried it. I think it's fine. There are some features that are part of the subscription that really, they're selling them as paid features. They really should be core. Like those features should be what the basic app is like. Like, you shouldn't have to use a reader mode for threads. Threads should be more readable by default, for example.
Yes,
and
that's a design issue.
That's a design issue, but they're selling it as a paid feature. Some other things like the ad-free articles with partner websites, that's cool, that's fine. but I just use a content blocker in Safari, you know, so
Right.
like that's not a huge deal for me. Top bar customization, that's pretty cool. Again, should probably be a basic feature of the app. It is in Tweetbot. And really, the thing for me, like I would probably go back to Twitter if only it offered timeline sync. But it's time, like I've tried to use the official Twitter app for multiple years. Like I haven't used Tweetbot in, I believe, like 4 to 5 years. So it's not like I haven't tried the official Twitter client at all. But it's just at some point I'm gonna make a decision, and the decision that I've made is I am more efficient if I always complete my timeline. I don't miss any tweets because, like I mentioned on Connected, Twitter for me is work. Like I use it primarily for work and then for personal interests like music and video games, but primarily to learn about like Apple news, new apps, what developers are doing, you know, what's new in iOS and iPadOS, that sort of thing. And for work, I gotta be efficient. So for me, timeline sync is the most efficient way to consume Twitter.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I didn't realize I was making you anxious by sending you tweets you hadn't seen before. I heard Connected.
Well, not anxious, but it was actually useful because it made me realize, you know, this is not working out. So I got to change something.
No, I get it. And, you know, the other thing, I guess, that comes with Twitter Blue are alternative icons and themes, which seems like a weird thing for a company as big as Twitter to be hanging their hat on for a subscription. But I don't know. I mean, you know, you be you, Twitter. It's fine. They have some nice icons and some nice themes. Although the themes are pretty basic. They're just like color splashes that are used for text and things like that. All right, let's move on. We also got news this week that Apple has announced a self-service repair program, something that you know, I don't know, I would have thought hell would freeze over before we got this, but you're going to be able to order manuals, tools, and parts from Apple and repair your devices yourself. Now, I think this is, you know, that those kind of repairs are easier said than done, but maybe the tooling will help with that. It'll be interesting to see exactly how extensive the repair kits are. Initially, it was pretty clear from the press release that they are starting with iPhones 12 and 13 and then moving on to Macs later in the year. So it's going to be a staged rollout over time. But I'm very curious about this. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I mean, I'm interested in looking at seeing what the tools are like, what the manuals say, and all that stuff. But I'm not sure I'm going to be doing a lot of repair stuff myself. I'll let someone like Stephen Hackett do that for me if I need it.
Exactly. Yes, I agree.
All right. Why don't you tell us what we had in the club this week, Federico?
So in the club, I did part 5 of my Obsidian setup series, but this time it's not an extension. It's a Shortcuts Essentials column, because this part of my Obsidian setup series is all about shortcuts, and specifically 2 shortcuts that I've been using on all my devices to append text to my dashboard note. I've already covered my dashboard note and how I use it. This one is a special shortcut in that it doesn't just append text at the bottom of the note. It appends text at the end of a specific section. This note is made of multiple sections, and with this shortcut, I can append text at the end of a section. I've basically recreated the setup that I covered before based on the plugin called Quick Add, but I've done it with shortcuts. And the advantage is that I can run this shortcut from the home screen, via Siri, via the share sheet. I can run it on the Mac, and it always works. And the other shortcut is another Safari-based shortcut that lets me clip web pages, basically save a link to a web page as a new note in Obsidian with support for metadata and as well selections. Like if I select something on the web page, that gets saved alongside the link and the title and the author, that kind of stuff. All these shortcuts, they are compatible with iPhone, iPad, and the Mac, and I've done some special optimization work to adapt them to macOS Monterey. And in addition, I've also created 2 additional sort of utilities based on PopClip, the Mac app that you covered before on MacStories. I've made 2 PopClip extensions to append your selected text from anywhere on macOS using these shortcuts. So I think it's a pretty cool look at how you can take advantage of shortcuts and other automation utilities on the Mac. But of course, you can also use them on iPhone and iPad with Siri, with widgets, the home screen, all the different ways that you can save text and interact with shortcuts, they are supported by this one. And I'm really excited for people to start using this as well, because it's been so helpful to me.
Yeah, these are really cool shortcuts. And I think PopClip right now is the best workaround for the lack of share sheet support with shortcuts for Mac. So that's something I've been playing around with an awful lot myself. I did a companion piece this week in MacStories Weekly that is a companion to my Stream Deck article that goes through what my setup is. It doesn't go through every single page because I've got like 6 pages of buttons and things like that, and it's also a work in process. But I did go through kind of my home base page, my HomeKit page, my Obsidian page, and my writing page, and those are all core pages of buttons that I use every day to do various things on my Mac. And I had a tip for using Alfred with shortcuts for Mac, because I think that it's easy to overcomplicate how you implement this stuff. There's a much easier way to trigger shortcuts for Mac in Alfred than I've seen mentioned before. So I wanted to include that tip. And we had an interview with Andreas Hegenberg, who is the developer of BetterTouchTool, which I think, pound for pound, is one of the best implementations on the Mac of a third-party automation tool that it works with shortcuts. Just a lot of really interesting actions that can be used to do all sorts of things on your Mac. All right, Federico. Also on App Stories this week, we had another episode all about iPhone, iPad, and Mac tips. We had done an episode like this, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then I guess things just caught up with us. We had other things going on, and we got back to it to kind of round out our tips, because we had a whole bunch that we didn't get to in the first episode. And so we have more in this one. Plus, you gave us your first impressions of the M1 MacBook Pro, that very high-end version of the MacBook Pro that Apple has sent you to review. And that was kind of fun to listen to how it's been, especially from the perspective of someone who hasn't used a Mac kind of day-to-day for quite a while.
Yeah, we had more tips, and I think this is not the last time we are going to share some of these new OS tips and sort of tricks that you can do on App Stories. This is a fun format, and I think it's fun to revisit as Apple updates, their OSs throughout the year, especially in the fall and in the spring. Going into the next year's WWDC, it's fun to revisit some of these things that you can do. And also, I'm very excited about the next episode of App Stories that is out on Monday. We're gonna do a deep dive into shortcuts for Mac, and I'm very excited to have that out, because we talked about all the different aspects of shortcuts on the Mac. There's a long segment of App Stories Plus, so yeah, stay tuned for Monday, because I think it's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really great episode. Before we get into our Unwind picks, I do want to mention a couple of things about Apple Arcade. Apple actually did a press release this week about Apple Arcade, and it seems like going into the holiday season, Apple wants you to know that Apple Arcade is a family-oriented service for kids and families to play games, because they highlighted 3 different games. They highlighted NBA 2K22 Arcade Edition, which is already out. It came out a week or 2 ago, I think. Lego Star Wars Castaways, which is out today, and Disney Melee Mania, which is coming soon. Didn't really give a date on that. So it's interesting. I mean, these games don't particularly do anything for me personally, but it seems to me what's more interesting to me is the way that Apple is positioning the service, especially going into the holidays, as kind of a thing for families to do together. And I think, without saying so explicitly, distinguishing it from the traditional console environment and experience. All right, Federico, why don't we do our Unwind picks now? I know you've got some music picks for us, and I know I've listened to both of these, and they're really good.
Well, I got 3 albums, actually. I added one more.
I see you added one. I've listened to part of the first one.
Okay, so but I want to start from the sort of go in order of epicness level, maybe.
Okay.
The first one I want to recommend is Red Taylor's version. Now, obviously, Taylor Swift, she announced last year, I believe, she will re-record her first 5, 6 albums due to licensing rights issues with her previous label. So we already had Fearless Taylor's version a few months ago, And now Red, her 2012 album, her fourth album, came out as a Taylor version. And of course, this is an album from 9 years ago, that has been entirely re-recorded by Taylor Swift. And the level of detail and the quality of the mixing and the mastering is really incredible here. I've always enjoyed Red. I resonate like Taylor's later albums, starting from 1989, from 2014. Those resonate with me more. I've never been a huge I wouldn't consider myself a Swiftie, as Taylor Swift fans
right.
would call themselves, but she's one of my favorite artists, of the past decade, really. But I resonate more with the starting from 1989. But I enjoy Red. I really do enjoy Red. I mean, there's some excellent songs in this record, like We're Never Ever Getting Back Together, like that one, for example. I Know You Were Trouble, of course, like it's All Too Well, obviously. So it's an excellent record. I enjoy the work that has been done in terms of re-recording all the tracks, and I enjoy the bonus material, what Taylor calls the From the Vault versions of some songs, like demos and unreleased tracks as well. And All Too Well, especially, which is considered like one of her greatest songs in terms of songwriting and sort of this hyper-realistic, style that she has when it comes to storytelling in her music. There's a 10-minute version of All Too Well now, which has been accompanied by a short film as well. And I enjoy, I do enjoy all the lore and the details and the fan theories that go into understanding Taylor Swift records, all the references and all the hidden meaning of certain things. So yeah, Taylor's version of Red, really great album.
I think one of the things about this album, Federico, that I really enjoy is that the re-recording has brought a new depth to these, because maybe they were maybe produced not quite as well in the past. Right. And I think that these albums really resonate more with someone like you, who's maybe into the more recent albums because of that, right? Because there's just more depth and stuff going on in them, which I really appreciate too.
Yeah, of course. And really, it's like having, you basically have modern Taylor Swift producing and singing older Taylor Swift material.
Right.
And it brings greater sort of equality, if you will, between her latest work and something like Red. And now, of course, there's a huge difference between Taylor's, say, Evermore or Folklore, her sort of pandemic albums, really, more intimate albums, whereas Red is a pop record, but what I appreciate is that you get modern Taylor Swift. So her, I think she got better over the years, basically, and I'm glad that we can have these earlier records redone. And I also think it's such a beautiful way to see an artist take back control over masters.
Yep.
Because this is what she's doing, and I think she's doing it in a really clever way, in terms of adding bonus material, doing new music videos, short films, having this extra content. And I also recommend listening to the Studio Pond, the what's it called, the Long Pond Studio Sessions. There's there's a separate version of All Too Well done at the same studio where Evermore or Folklore or both albums were
I think both. I didn't realize that. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it came out like 2 days ago. So there's a version of that. My second album is the debut album of Silk Sonic. Now, Silk Sonic are Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak. They formed this incredible duo with their debut album called An Evening with Silk Sonic. Now, this album is so much fun. It's basically a 70s inspired album that mixes sort of 70s style pop and R&B with some modern hip hop influences. It's such a polished, glossy, fun record. It's 7 songs. I believe it's 7 songs plus an intro track. And you probably heard some of this already on the radio or on TV, like Leave the Door Open, for example, or Skate, which were the 2 opening singles of this record. But it's such a tight album. And I mean, Bruno Mars is well known for being a really detail-obsessed producer. I mean, his previous work with 24K Magic, for example, won a bunch of Grammy Awards in 2016. Bruno Mars is well known for, one, being an incredible singer, and two, being an incredible producer, very detail-oriented. And An Evening with Silk Sonic is very old school and modern at the same time. Anderson .Paak, of course, brings a ton of talent as well with his vocal performances, as well as he's a great drummer too. And this is the kind of album that sounds old school but new at the same time. It's very much a sort of a tribute to some of these 70s and early 80s influences that Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak have, but it's so fun to listen to something like this. And some of the highlights from this record, I really like, for example, After Last Night and Fly As Me. Like, those two songs are so much fun. And also I recommend checking out the lyrics because they are sometimes ridiculous and so much fun. This is like a fun, positive album to put on and to dance to and to listen to. And of course, it's also a very good record in terms of the quality of the engineering and the mixing itself. They did a ton of work. I was reading an interview in Rolling Stone. They both did a ton of work in terms of finding just the right equipment, like just the right drum kit, for example, or the, what's it called? A Glockenspiel? The little,
yes.
Just the right version of that, like a specific model or a specific set of congas from the 70s, right? Like that kind of stuff I'm super into, and I appreciate like an album that sounds like a real album, like all instruments being played by real people. It's and it's a short album, like you can listen to it all in less than 40 minutes, which is something that I appreciate.
Yeah, I listened to it yesterday for the first time, and it was a lot of fun to listen to. I think what's really interesting, and I know you've got one more pick, but all three of these picks are perfect for things like lossless, like Apple Lossless. They all sound, they all have this really deep, resonant sound to them that I think works really well with a good set of headphones or a good set of speakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the big dog in this fight, the Adele's new album 30 just came out a few hours ago. It comes out today, Friday, November 19th. Long anticipated album. After 6 years, Adele is back, and I just so I was familiar with the one single, Easy on Me, before, and I also watched Adele's one night concert. I believe it was a CBS special. I watched it like 4 times a couple of days ago, and where she did more new songs from the album. And I listened to the full record almost twice this morning. After I woke up, it was the first thing I did right after having coffee. Now, I am honestly speechless. This is a beautiful record. So this is an album about divorce, right? Adele got divorced from her husband a few years ago. And this is an album about the difficulties of love and relationships and marriage and the challenges of, having a child. She's been raising her 9-year-old child, Angelo, I believe his name is. She moved from London to LA. She completely upended her life. But this is not an album about defeat. It's the thing that really stands out to me here. This is an album about this is a cathartic album, I think. Would be my first impression about
I think that's
the
right.
lowest point of a failed relationship and starting your life over with an understanding of how and where and why you failed, right? And picking yourself up again. And I mean, Adele is an example of, like, I don't know how and why, but Adele keeps getting better with, some artists, they have incredible success when they're young, and then over the years they just do more of the same. And especially with artists that have such an incredible gift, which is their voice, maybe their voice gets worse over the years. Adele is only getting better, and on this record she sounds at the top of her game, absolutely top of her game. And there are some songs on this album that are just incredible to listen to in terms of like getting chills when you listen to these songs. But there's one in particular that I tweeted about this morning called To Be Loved. And I honestly believe it's one of the most beautiful and most impressive vocal performances I've ever heard in my life. I cannot listen to the song without crying. It's so touching and intimate, and powerful at the same time. And she's basically screaming by the end of the song. It's almost a 7-minute song. What I also appreciate about this album is the variety of it. This is a classic Adele sort of soul pop album, but she's trying new things. She teamed up with producers Shellback and Max Martin. Of course, Greg Kurstin is also back. You know, Greg Kurstin helped her out with Hello from her previous album. He's back now with Easy on Me and a bunch of other songs on this record. But she also teamed up with Shellback and Max Martin. We both of them are famous for helping out on various pop records in recent history, like Coldplay, for example. And there are some fun tracks on this album, like Can I Get It, for example, is a really fun and different Adele song. There are some excellent highlights in here. I Drink Wine. I absolutely love that song. It's very Elton John inspired, I think. On Hold, another really powerful song about sort of hating many things about yourself, but sort of also coming to terms with those things that you don't like about yourself. Go listen to the album, put it on, enjoy, pay attention to the lyrics. There's a story that Adele is telling on this record, and strap in because it's an emotional journey. And I also love the sort of I believe, at least I want to believe it's a reference on the very last song of this album is called Love is a Game. And to me, sounds to me like, at least this song, I can tell that there are some sort of Amy Winehouse, for example, influences. And I do enjoy the reference in, Adele is singing Love is a Game. And of course, very famously, Amy Winehouse used to sing Love is a Losing Game. It's one of Amy Winehouse's most beautiful songs. But Adele is singing Love is a Game, not a losing game. And so I do enjoy that. Potentially a reference on the last song of the album. But yeah, this is gonna be, I can tell, right up there in my list of albums of the year. Just incredible performance. Beautiful album, beautiful record, some variety, spiced in, which I appreciate. Yeah, go listen, enjoy. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've only listened to about a third of it, but what I've heard is fantastic. And I think I would suggest, even if you've never really been a big fan of Adele, you should listen to this, because I haven't historically been a big Adele fan, but this one really struck me more than the past albums. And I've, like I said, I've only gotten a third of the way through it. But even so, I was hooked right from the very start and plan to listen to the rest of it as I do my things today, getting ready for the club weekly and all that sort of thing. All right, Federico, I've got a pick for you that's a little nerdier than all the music picks that you had today, which is a documentary that The Verge did called Springboard, which is about the secret history of the first smartphone. Okay,
I've seen this.
Yeah, this is about a half an hour long. It's about Handspring, and it's primarily about the Handspring Trio, which was doing a lot of things that ultimately you would find in things like the iPhone and Android down the road, and all the things that they got right and all the things that went wrong for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, they had a lot of trouble because they were launching this company out of, it goes all the way back to the Palm Pilot and a lot of the same people involved. And then they put out the Handspring Visor, which I had one of those, which is why I kind of enjoyed watching this, because it was a lot of nostalgia. I had a Palm Pilot back in the day, and I had a Handspring Visor. I can't believe I got rid of it. I had one of the lowest serial number Handspring Visors that were released. It was like the first 100 units that were shipped, and it was pretty cool. It was a cheaper version of the Palm Pilot, and back then these things didn't have connectivity at all. They weren't smartphones. But the thing about the Visor was it had this slot, which was inspired by the Game Boy, and you could put things in hardware cartridges in this slot, and turn it into a GPS or turn it into a phone and things like that. And that evolved into the Handspring Trio, which was actually a smartphone. And they had all kinds of problems getting carriers on board. The .com bubble burst in the midst of it all. They signed up a really expensive lease that they couldn't pay for. They had made a lot of really bad business decisions that ultimately ended in the failure of the company, especially once the iPhone came out in 2007. But these trios were starting to come out. I think the first one was in 2001. So it was really an interesting precursor to what we have today with both iPhones and Android devices. So it's the one thing that I that I think is a little odd about this is The Verge has decided that they are going to do apps on TVs. And so the only way to watch this is to download The Verge app on your Apple TV.
I hear that the future of TV is apps. So
yeah.
sense.
I feel like they watched Tim Cook's video from 4 or 5 years ago and didn't see the rest of the history over the last few years. But it's not on YouTube. It's not like streaming in kind of the normal. I don't know. It's a strange decision to me. I know that they've got apps on Android, on Chromecast, on the Kindle Fire. They've had to create different apps for different platforms, but I think The Verge does a very good job with their video. These apps collect a lot of their reviews and a lot of the other video things that they do, and they use this documentary as kind of a way to launch the whole new service. It's all free, so you just have to get the app and then watch it. But yeah, I highly recommend it. It's narrated by Dieter Bohn, who's one of their senior editors and writers at The Verge, and super well done. A lot of great interviews with the people who were there at the time. So if you want to see kind of some of the precursors of where things were heading before we even got the iPhone, this is a good place to start. All right, Federico, that's it for another week on Unwind. We'll be back again next Friday. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.